Halloween used to be my favorite holiday. It was the one time of year that you could be anything you wanted to be. You could draw out your darkest desires and display them for the world to see. No one would think you were odd for being the person that you always wanted to be. There was no judgment for your choice of attire, and oftentimes, you were commended for that choice. Then at the end of the night, you received a reward for your efforts in the form of a bag full of candy. I'm far too old to go door to door begging for treats. I do enjoy watching my children do the same. Weeks in advance, we let them pick out their costumes. They are far too young to delve into the ghastly and usually end up picking a character from a popular movie or a TV show. I simply take pictures and urge them onto each doorway. I always remind them to say, "Trick or treat," before the door opens. It's been this way for quite a few years now, but I'm starting to question the tradition, especially after visiting 113 Forest Road. This past year, we made some pretty good rounds of our local neighborhood. We made sure only to approach the homes with their porch light on, which was the unspoken rule. Our night had almost come to an end when we finally reached a home that had been vacant for the last, 2 seasons? It was the largest within our neighborhood, towering at 2 stories when all the others only had 1 level. It was a large brick Victorian monstrosity, really, that may have once been beautiful, but the landscape had long needed work. It was the house that most of the kids made their stories about. And when we saw the dim glow of a yellow bulb, I was unsure of letting my children approach. My oldest begged to ring the doorbell, and my youngest simply wanted more candy. I was outnumbered, and I relented to their pleas. My wife sat within the idling vehicle while I followed close behind them. The 2 made their way up the steps, and I waited at the bottom, like always. I reminded them of what to say. My eldest son held his brother's hands and pressed the button. Ringing was much like church bells, echoed from within the house for just a moment, before returning to silence. After a few seconds, they turned to me with questioning looks. I noticed a moving truck parked outside the home earlier that month, and I knew somebody must live there, but I hadn't seen him. There was no car in the driveway, and I didn't see any lights on inside. I started to think that they were simply gone, but left the light on in case it was dark by the time they came back. I waved my children to come back to the car and told them that we would just head home. That look of disappointment on their face told me that, they weren't ready to end the night just yet. Their faces lit up as the door creaked to life, and a voice beckoned them to wait. "Trick or treat," they both screamed with excitement. A feeling rolled in me like a thunder, and a signal of danger rang out in my head. Something wasn't right. If they were home all this time, where was that car I had seen sitting in their driveway for the past, few weeks? Instinctively, I advanced on my 2 children, taking the steps in leaps. A feeling inside me told me that they should not go toward that voice. I called out to them to stop as soon as they turned towards the door. "I choose both." The voice seemed strained, kind of like that of a lifelong smoker. 2 ragged hands shot from the parted pathway and drew both of my little boys inside. Their screams echoed in my head. My adrenaline shot me forward, but my body slammed against the closing door. I pounded repeatedly, screaming obscenities of every nature. My body shook violently as my world turned into a spiral of despair. This whole scene drew the attention of my wife, who was soon right behind me. In an effort to find an entry, I took a step back, lifted my right foot, and dropped it full force into the hard wood. The door frame shattered, allowing me to enter and flee into the darkness. I cried out in terror for my little boys. I rushed from room to room. My entire reason for living had been snatched up in an instant, and I had been too late to stop it. When the house had been searched completely, with no results, my wife phoned the authorities with wails of agony. We both held each other till the sirens lit up in our tiny neighborhood. It's been a year now, and we still have no answers. None as to what happened to our children. My wife distanced herself from me. I'm sure she blames me for what happened. I don't fault her for it. I blame myself as well. If I had not let them go to that door or listened to my feelings sooner, they would both still be here. Halloween is no longer a fun time for us, but a reminder of our mistakes. I don't even leave my house on that night, and even the sight of a pumpkin makes tears just stream down my face. The drive home from work is especially hard, witnessing the houses that decorate for the occasion. I'm almost in a full-blown panic by the time I close myself within the safety of my home. Please, if you read this, do not let your kids visit 113 Forest Road on Halloween.
Let me begin by saying the US Navy, sadly, has among the highest divorce and suicide rates of any profession. The long and extended deployments, the stress of little to no communication with the outside world while overseas, all the little amazing things we take for granted on land, the luxuries you just can't bring onto a ship, and the many other sacrifices, including not seeing loved ones for a very long time. Well, enough bitching. We know what we signed up for, right? So, now you have an idea, or a glimpse, perhaps, on why it can be so stressful. That, of course, is also taking into account the job and the burdens that come with the territory. But we won't be going into too much more of that. No, you see, this story is about death and the hereafter. Is there such a thing, you ask? Years ago I may not have said so, as I've always questioned everything and tried to rationalize. Probably what got me into trouble the most, questioning authority and such. However, this event and those which followed have most certainly changed that for me. Now, I've never told this story, or any others like it, to anyone, as I've never wanted to open up about them. So, consider yourself, my audience, to be my therapists, my own personal life draft. Anyway, I digress. Imagine, if you will, you're in a floating prison 1,000,000 nautical miles from anywhere. A 900-foot massive warship with 20 levels, decks, Humvees, tanks, fighter jets, and several thousand sailors and marines. A ship so large in size, even the most experienced, scurvy pirate be lost. There are so many hidden compartments, it's almost impossible to explore the entire beast, and I'd ask no one to attempt to do so, lest ye be ready to lose your way. The hallways on a ship, peeways they're called, are very narrow, as space is limited on such a vessel, for precious cargo and the like. This detail is important, as it dictates the foot traffic and the actions of said personnel. When navigating a ship, you always let the superior officer or enlisted person pass you as you slam your back against the wall. This is a sign of respect and long-standing Navy tradition. Now, at night all lights go out, and you've only but a dim red light throughout the ship to illuminate your path. If you were to step outside, say, onto the flight deck of the ship, you could look in every direction and see nothing but the vast, dark, empty abyss that is the unforgiving ocean. Very dark and dangerous to be out this time of night. Midnight comes, and I am on watch. The battle watch captain needs something. Oh God, please don't pick me, I think to myself. This place gives me the creeps. Damn, I'm the chosen one. Or, at least for this mission, I'm to undertake. Oh, great. We are out of printer paper again. I know what this means. I'll have to travel to the lowest decks of the ship in the middle of the unforgiving darkness and the ever-so-empty peeways on my quest to seek the Holy Grail, which in this case is copy paper. I'm all alone on this one. Or so I thought. I begin my voyage to the stairs that are marked Captain's Stairway, or something to that effect. It's late. No one will know. Besides, It's a long way around, and I don't want to be gone too long. This was a major shortcut. Certainly I'll be yelled at if I'm caught. Well, I make my way down the very steep but quite nice narrow steps until I reach the deck where I have to get to in order to retrieve my supplies. I eventually find the compartment, which, by the way, is not marked by anything and has no lights. Well, I may not have service, but my cell phone has a flashlight at least. So I fire up that bad boy as I scour around for what I need. Weird. I just noticed there's no one in here. Normally a supply officer is in these quarters. Oh well, I think. I need to grab my shit, sign the paper, and get the hell out of here. Only, I wasn't alone. I hear what I can only describe as a man pounding, with faint, deep breaths, like they're fighting for air, and I hear rustling and what sounded like someone struggling. I look around, I open all the doors I see, move every large object that could obstruct someone. After all, it's pitch black. All of a sudden, it goes quiet. I see what appeared to be two dark figures, and then a loud bang, like metal slamming down against another object, or what sounds like a construction site. I noped the fuck out of there, ran like hell, as I felt eyes watching me, as if my every move was being followed. I ran so fast in the darkness I dropped my supplies that I'd come for, my heart beating as if I was escaping gunfire. Something is after me, I thought. Am I going insane? I hear footsteps nearing me as I make my way back to my workspace. And again, it goes quiet, as if nothing had happened. I arrive back on my watch, empty-handed, looking pale and out of breath. What happened? Where the hell's my shit? My chief asks. I began to explain the situation, but he stopped me, shook his head, and looked down. Jeez, I'm fucked, I thought to myself. I'm already on thin ice with this guy, and then he motions for me to come closer, and I sit beside him. He quietly begins to scold me. I sit down with my eyes wide open, a dumb expression on my face as he informs me I was never to go back down to that space again. Why not, Chief? I ask. It's evil, son. Pure evil. Didn't anyone tell you? He looked at me, puzzled. I nodded and shook my dumb head side to side, still breathing heavily, and said quietly, No, Chief. What the hell is down there? I later found out there was a murder-suicide down in that space. Some type of love affair, I suppose, and a lot of guilt that followed. I don't know the full details surrounding why. What I do know is I'll never set foot on another ship again, and I didn't go back down there for the rest of the deployment. I'm not certain what I encountered that evening. All I know is I've never been the same since.
The automaton lay on its side, rain pouring over it, waiting for its master to come back for it. How long it had been waiting, he could not remember. Had it been a few days or a few decades? The automaton could only tell the passage of time at this point in two ways, whether it was day or night, and whether or not it was rain or snow. Right now there was rain. A lot of rain. There must have been at least one winter, though, as it could remember being buried in snow at one point. The automaton was an obsolete model. It had served its master's father before being passed down to its current master. It was still perfectly functional at the time, and the design, although objectively simple, was exquisite compared to its modern counterparts, which were not especially superior in functionality, but were more cheaply produced. There was true craftsmanship in this particular robot, and while this mattered little anymore to those who bought such units, it caused its master to treat it as his favorite among his collection of mechanical servants. The automaton was not designed to feel, but it did. It felt the rain pelting its metal constitution. It felt its springs and bolts beginning to rust. It felt the passage of time seem to stretch into infinity, its memories becoming blurred and faded with each fresh shower. The automaton had begun to lose track of time when it started raining the first time. The day its master left it behind. It no longer remembered where in the world, in the yard or at a park. They were there when his mother told him to hurry inside because it was starting to rain. All it knew was that it was dropped on its side in the grass. Since then, there was only the rain and the snow, and the occasional bug or animal to keep it company. By now, it was almost halfway buried in the mud. A relic from a bygone age. It would eventually be a fossil, left to rust, sinking, disintegrating.
Am I going to be charged with murder? The detective sighed and didn't answer. His eyes were tired, haunted. Just help us get to the bottom of this, he said. Okay, I replied. I'll do my best. I could hear the tremor in my voice. I hadn't stopped shaking since it happened. I had a strong drink to settle my nerves. It hadn't worked. Let's start at the beginning, said the detective. You were having a Halloween party. Yeah, I said. We do it every year. We take turns hosting and the whole block participates. This year it was our turn. So you're the one who set up the decorations? Yeah, I said. Oh God, that sounds bad, but it wasn't just me, it was lots of people. I was mostly just supervising. All right, well, can you give me a list of who was involved? Yeah, it was, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. Just give me a moment to calm down. I can give you the list. It's okay. We'll come back to that. Okay. So, who was it that set up the scarecrow? It was me, I said. But I didn't... Oh, God. I mean... Okay, I didn't do that. I set it up the night before. Someone must have come in during the night and... Oh, God. The room swayed and my breath came fast and sharp. My heart ratcheted up its pace to breakneck speed, and darkness began to close in around my vision. Hey, the detective said, just calm down. You're hyperventilating. I had to take long, calm breaths. I did as he said. My heart slowed, but the panic remained. Okay, thanks, I said. Think you can keep going? He asked. Yeah, I said. Just give me a moment. My body convulsed with tremors, but in a few minutes they had settled down to a mild shaking in my hands. I gulped down a hard knot in my throat. Okay, I said. I'm ready. So, the scarecrow, the detective prompted. The word filled me with dread. The scarecrow, I repeated, numbly. It's a Halloween tradition. The neighbors said as much. You destroy it every year? Yeah, I said. Usually it's filled with candy and straw like a piñata. The kids beat it with sticks and everyone has a good time. I just don't understand. God, why someone would do that? Yeah, it's too early to speculate, said the detective. Right now, we're just gathering the facts. When did you notice that something was wrong? Well, right away I noticed that the scarecrow wasn't coming apart as easily as it should have been, but I thought that I just put it together too well, so I grabbed a stick and, yeah. I took a swing. The detective leaned forward. And then what happened? My shoulders slumped, my mouth was cottony and dry. And then, I said, then the scarecrow began to bleed, and, there was a pregnant pause. The detective's eyes bore into mine, willing me to continue. He said nothing, and I had to fill the silence. It fell over, I said. The hat came off when we saw it was a body. What happened then? The kids started screaming. One girl started it, the Oakley girl, I think, and they all went off. We, the other parents and I, we pulled them all away, we called the police, and well, that's it, you know the rest. The detective scribbled his last note, and closed the fold-top notebook he had been writing in. His eyes were hard, dull gray stone, impossible to read. When he spoke next, his words were measured, careful. His voice was soft. "What interests me, Mr. Johnson," he said, "is that you haven't asked about your wife." The question caught me completely off guard. My wife?" I said. She's out of town." "Oh, God, she's going to freak out when she finds out what happened. She hates the block Halloween party enough as it is." "Your wife is out of town?" prodded the detective. The question poked a fresh wound. "Yes," I said, forgetting my fear in a moment of irritation. She and my son are spending the holiday with her parents in Virginia." "Well, that seems strange," the detective said. "A family spending a holiday apart." I got the feeling he knew something more than he was letting on. Have you talked to her?" I said. "Well, I'd like to hear your side." My wife and I are going through a rough patch right now," I said, "but I don't see why this is relevant. It's our job to gather all the information. Then we can decide what is and is not relevant. Why is your wife not spending the holiday with you?" I sighed. I wasn't proud of it, but I was getting flustered. I could feel hot blood rising into my face. We're separated." "Why is that?" It's personal. Your wife said that it was related to infidelity." "Okay, so you have talked to her." "Yes." "Fine. You know, I cheated on my wife. I destroyed our family. It's all my fault. Now I've had a hell of a day, so if you don't mind, can you please tell me what the hell this has to do with anything?" The detective paused. He spoke softly. "Your wife is in police custody, Mr. Johnson." "What?" "No, I'm sorry I have to tell you this. But she's rendered a full confession." A full confession? A confession of what? What the hell are you talking about?" "Well, it happens occasionally in cases of separation. One party feels the need to punish the other, but unfortunately, the children are sometimes used as a tool to that end." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The room swam. Bile rose in my throat. Oh, God. Oh, God. I'm afraid that we've positively identified the remains as belonging to your son, Ben. The scream died in my throat. I blacked out.
In 1904, an asylum prison in Clifton, Virginia was shut down by a successful petition by the growing population of the residents of Fairfax County. During the transfer of inmates to the new facility, the transport carrying the inmates crashed. Some prisoners escaped, and some were found dead. So, a search party was sent to find all of them. All were found except one inmate, Douglas J. Griffin. After his disappearance, the locals began to allegedly find clearly skinned, half-eaten carcasses of rabbits hanging from trees nearby a bridge overpass, locally known as the Bunny Man Bridge. A second party was sent out to search the area, and they found the carcass of Marcus Walster, who was found in a similar way as the rabbits. Eventually, they did find Griffin. He had barely escaped, but got hit by an oncoming train. Griffin died exactly where the original transport had crashed. Officers later found that Griffin was institutionalized for killing his family and children on Easter Sunday. So, for years after the death of Douglas J. Griffin, carcasses were found hanging on Halloween. Some people even claim to see a bunny man on the bridge. So, do what you choose, believe the story, or pass it off as a myth. One thing is for sure, though, you'll never know if you don't look.
This happened just yesterday, so it's fresh in my mind. I'm not quite sure what to think of it because it was just so bizarre and unbelievable. I might have just been sleep deprived. So, last night at maybe 2300, I was walking around my block. My town is relatively safe, so I didn't feel in danger. Plus, it was a pretty night. I'd been walking around for 5 minutes when a pale woman with blonde hair and a white dress caught my eye from across the street. She was about my height and looked to be around my age, too. I didn't actually pay attention to her after I first noticed her. But when I circled the block again, she was on the same street, a couple of feet in front of me. She was standing on the curb staring at the cars passing by. It was a main road, so even that late people were still driving on it. I said hello to her and she turned her gaze to me. I couldn't see her face super well, but from what I think I saw, she had no pupils or color in her eyes. She just stared at me. After a while, I asked if she was okay. She didn't respond again and simply pointed at the road. I was really confused and didn't understand. Right as a red car started coming down the road, and she stepped into the road. The car slammed into her and it was a bloody mess. The driver immediately stopped and jumped out. It was a man in his mid-20s. We both spoke about it, freaking out. He called the police and I went around the car to see the state of the girl. Once I circled around the car, she was gone. Not gone as in dead, gone as in she just wasn't there. The blood on the road was gone too, but not gone from his car. After the police arrived, they concluded that it was some big hoax of a kid who didn't know what they were talking about and some guy who went along with it. The blood on the car was brought to investigation only to be found as paint. Nothing else was put up about it. I'm not sure if what happened was real. It felt so real, but I don't believe in the paranormal. I don't know what it was. If it was just a dream or if it was real. I remember it like it was real. I feel I can't leave the house now. I don't understand anything now, and I kind of feel like I'm going crazy. Has anyone else experienced something like this?
I would do it every night. It didn't matter if it was humid or frigid. I sat out on the porch of the house my grandfather built and poured 2 shots of whiskey. My eyes often stared into the woods that surrounded my house. I had done it for years, as I would sit in my favorite chair with my rifle leaned against the wall. I always found the sound of critters and bugs relaxing. It was around this time that I did my nightly ritual of pouring 2 shots of whiskey and placed them on the table my grandfather had built. I never got to meet him in person. My dad told me his old man was a strange fellow, but he was talented as I looked down to see his craftsmanship. A solid oak table that he engraved by hand. It had different words that a simple country boy couldn't pronounce, and symbols I had seen nowhere else. The way my dad talked about him before he himself passed, I would have liked him. I lifted the first glass and drank it. The shot of a stiff drink burned as it went down my throat, leaving that little tingle in my chest. I heard the crickets chirp and closed my eyes, soaking in the hot summer night until I could hear a faint growl at my feet. "What is it, May?" I asked as my eyes looked down at the red-nosed pit bull that lied at my feet. She was a good dog and often sat outside with me. Some fool had left her on the edge of my property 2 years back. The one thing that people in Coleman knew about me was that I could be a sucker for big dumb dogs. My luck hasn't always been the best with them though. They always end up disappearing in the woods and never coming back. My friend Eugene always told me that I needed to do something about those damn coyotes that keep getting my pets, but I knew the truth. It wasn't those scavengers that kept picking off my dogs. "You can smell them, can't you, girl?" I asked as I rubbed behind her ear. I stood up from my chair and grabbed my rifle, walking to the edge of the porch to see the tree line swaying as I could hear May whine behind me. I aimed the sights at the trees in the distance while waiting for those bastards to show themselves. It was a game of patience now. The sound of branches snapping echoed from the distance as I rested my finger on the trigger. "Come on out here, boys. This is private property. and I got my Winnie waiting for you," I yelled, hoping it was just another pair of dumb teens. They love to come around at night sometimes. It was a dumb legend around here that my family land is haunted. It started when my grandfather got torn apart in his own damn yard. The legend goes that his ghost wanders the yard, screaming and looking for his limbs that got torn off. It's bullcrap, honestly. I've never heard my ancestors screaming around the house. "Last chance to show yourself, or I will start shooting that way," I shouted my last warning. May began to bark aggressively, and I fired off a shot into the woods. The sound of a painful roar came soon after. I knew then it wasn't any dumb boys from town. I cocked my rifle again and gripped it tightly, waiting for them. It had been a while since they showed themselves. The three figures stepped out from the trees and stared at me with their piercing, hollow eyes. It had been almost 6 months since I had last seen the large, gray-skinned beasts lumbering into my yard. It was time to get inside as I turned to my dog. "All right, May, let's get inside," I called as I patted my leg. I stepped back and headed to the front door, opening it. I could hear the creatures as I turned to see them moving quickly to the two of us. The dog quickly shuffled inside. I quickly followed and closed the front door, keeping my rifle pointed at it as I waited for them to try to come inside. The sound of their growls echoed around the house as their footsteps circled the place my grandfather had built. May continued to bark loudly. The dog hated the damn things more than I did. The roar pierced my eardrums, and then it was silent. I placed my finger on the trigger and waited for their next move. The next noise left me with the feeling of dread. It wasn't another growl nor footsteps that I could hear. It was much worse. It was the wind blowing inside my house. I turned and quickly ran to the kitchen and knew that tonight differed from the others. The back door was wide open, blowing the night's air into the house. Crap. The sound of floor creaked from within as I could hear the dog barking furiously now. The steps were heavy as I followed them and began walking around each room. The bastards were becoming more clever and were coming up with strategies instead of charging aimlessly as they had before. "May, where are you, girl?" I whispered while looking for my canine companion. My eyes scanned every corner as I tried to tread carefully and lightly through my home. The heavy creaks continued as I headed down the hall to the bedroom. That was May's safe place, where she would hide. I pushed open the door and paused. I could hear it as the footsteps rushed towards me. I quickly turned around and let another gunshot. As my ears began to ring, I felt something else. The warm feeling of my blood dripping down my arm as my eyes saw the teeth sink into my shoulder. It released me briefly before it overpowered me and pushed my body into the wall. The feeling of my ribs cracking as it pressed onto me tightly. It snarled as I felt its hot breath on my face. The beast screamed in agony as I saw the glimmer of a blade lunge into its back. I buckled as its paws released me, and I fell to the ground from the pain in my ribs. The monster wailed again as I could see the knife cut across its chest. It's about damn time you showed up," I coughed. I looked to see a man, one that I had only ever seen in pictures and heard stories about. He stood in between me and the creature as he cut the creature one last time before it had lost its courage and fled. I struggled to stand as he began to walk towards the front room. "They're growing in the numbers," he said. "They're getting smarter too, Granddad," I said as I watched him walk onto the front porch, staring down the 4 beasts that stood frozen in my yard. He paused for a moment before looking at the shot of the whiskey and turning it to his lips. He wiped his face as the creatures began to turn and walk back into the woods. I looked their direction for a brief moment to watch the retreat, before turning back to the 2 empty glasses. He was gone again without saying a word to me. I walked over to the table, pouring another shot of whiskey. My grandfather had worked hard tonight and saved my ass. He deserved another offering.
honey. How was your day? Wow. Something smells amazing. Ribs? Count me in. When did you learn how to cook? Seriously, this looks better than it smells. Well, forgive my manners. This is going to be messy. Oh my god. What is in this sauce? And did you use that ceviche method or something? How is this meat so damn tender? And small ribs like this too? Is this veal or what? Aren't you going to eat? No, that reminds me. Do you need me to go and feed Jack? Hell, I tell you what, you eat and I'll warm up some milk and take care of the little guy. I want to make sure you enjoy this too. Oh? Is he sleeping or something? I know he's been a monster the last few weeks with his teething and all. I wish I could be around more, but the office has me traveling more than usual. This stupid project is so stressful, but I can't imagine how much sleep you've lost. Hey, did you notice the baby monitor's off? It's probably those batteries again. Convenient, they say. And that is until the little pink rabbit runs out of juice. What do you mean it doesn't matter? And how exactly isn't Jack an issue anymore?
I need to give you a little background on the situation my sister and I were in before I begin the story. I was having a hard time after September 11th of 2001. I had lost my job and got behind on a few bills, and I ended up sharing a small apartment with my sister who was also having a hard time catching up. We were feeling down and out in life, doing drugs and other things that we really shouldn't have been doing. We were definitely going down the wrong path. It was Halloween night 2003. All the trick-or-treaters had gone in for the evening. My sister and I realized that we didn't have anything in the house to drink, so we decided to go down to the corner store. We got our coats on and headed down the street, discussing where our lives were headed and how we needed to change the way we were living. Before we knew it, we were at the store. We went in and got our drinks and headed back home. On our way back home, we continued our conversation. We walked about 2 blocks and the both of us got a really eerie feeling. I looked up and saw a large being coming towards us. It was about 6.5 feet tall. It was wearing a large top hat. It also had on a long black trench coat like the one that Jack the Ripper wore. We were a little bit creeped out, but we decided to keep walking, a little more cautious in our strides. As we got closer to the being, more and more detail came into focus. It had long white wiry hair. Its arms and legs were out of proportion with the rest of its body. I then looked at its hands and realized that they too were extra long and thin, its fingers long and bony. It seemed to radiate pure evil. There was no way I could see its face or features that it had, due to the top hat shading its face in the night. My sister and I were now really freaked out. There was no way we could get to the gate of our complex before it reached us. Its pace seemed to quicken as we got closer and closer to it. It almost seemed to glide across the ground in an unearthly gait. My sister grabbed my shoulder and pulled me through a gap in the fence. Safely on the other side of the fence, we glanced back. A few moments later, the being was there. It passed us with almost no acknowledgement except a slight movement of its head, as if to show its discontent in our escape. My sister and I, although shaken, headed home with an eager pace. The next morning I awoke with the events of the night before vividly in my mind. The more I thought about it, I realized that I didn't remember there ever being a gap in the fence before. I had walked all around the complex, and the only openings in the fence were the entrance gates. I just thought that maybe the apartments had been doing maintenance on the fence, so I went to check. There weren't any gaps large enough for an adult to squeeze through, so I went to the office to ask them. They looked at me as if I were crazy and told me they hadn't done any maintenance on the fence in at least 6 months. I just thank God for giving us an out, and not allowing this thing to overtake my sister and I. Shortly after the events of that Halloween night, we quit doing drugs and we turned our lives around. I truly think the events of that night was a wake-up call for us. It was a divine way of telling us that we were going down the wrong path.
The Dream. Credit to Sarah Jane. I'm running as fast as I can down the road ahead of me. It's a long gravel road, and as far as my eyes can see, there's no end. I'm in heels. I've tripped and stumbled and nearly fallen countless times, but I can't risk stopping long enough to take them off. I can hear them behind me, chasing me. There's 3 of them. They are tall and fast, and each of them is wearing the same black robe and mask. I don't know why they're chasing me, and I don't remember how it started. All I can remember is running. Suddenly I see another one, and he's coming towards me from the opposite direction. I begin to panic. I consider dashing into the trees on either side of the road, but surely I'd twist my ankle and be doomed. No, I must keep running. I must stay on this road and hope for the best. My heart thrashes wildly in my chest as I reach the figure, but he just continues past me. A moment later, I hear a scream behind me. I can't help but turn around and look. He's attacked them. All 3 of my pursuers are lying motionlessly on the ground, presumably dead. I see no weapon, so I'm clueless as to how he's done it. I've stopped running now, and I stare wide-eyed at the figure that approaches me. Thank you, I stammer nervously. The figure's breaths come loud and raspy through the hole in the mouth of their mask. We both stand still for what seems like an eternity before they finally respond. You wouldn't be thanking me if you knew what I looked like. I'm surprised. The voice, it's female. I watch curiously, and more than a little scared as the figure raises her hand to her mask and slowly removes it. I scream. The person has my face. Only it's been beaten and mangled. She has 2 black eyes, a bloody, broken nose, a busted lip. What's going on here? I cry. She stares blankly at me. I couldn't let them do it to you. What they've done to the rest, she says. It's time for you to return. Now. I open my mouth and demand a real answer, but then I start to feel very tired. I try to fight it, but I can't. I fall to the ground. I'm in a hospital bed when I wake up. I moan in pain because my head feels like it's splitting open, and my parents rush to my side. I hadn't even noticed them. Sweetie, are you okay? My mother asks, taking my hand in hers and kissing me on the cheek. I shut my eyes and I try to remember what happened. I had been watching the news. There was an interesting story going that people were mysteriously dying in their sleep. Not unusual for the elderly, but these were people my age. Autopsies repeatedly revealed that the victims were perfectly healthy. I must have fallen asleep, but that dream, it felt so real, so eerie. Yeah, Mom. I'm fine, I answer. What happened? My mother looks at my father as if to ask him what he wants, to take over. He shakes his head. No one really knows, dear, she tells me. You weren't answering my calls, so I got worried. I rushed over and used the spare keys above the door to let myself in. I found you unconscious on your couch. You were holding this. She reaches into her purse and pulls out a mask. The mask from my dream.
Hello, everyone. I'm a water treatment plant operator. Been doing this about a decade. I've been the night shift guy my whole career. The nights are normally quiet and can be boring if everything goes to plan. My plant has a few different buildings. The oldest is 60 or so years old. The main building I spend a majority of the shift in is roughly 20 years old. For more backstory of the area, this used to be a booming energized area. This area was littered with railroad tracks and drifters coming and going on the trains of yesteryear. Our farms and factories were very bountiful back then. Well, now that you all understand that, you must also understand that with success in an area there is also a darkness. From the settling of the area, wars with natives, and even into the 30s and 40s of people being killed in train wrecks and bad business deals, the grounds are laced with the darkness. The silence of the night shift can be eerie all on its own. Lots of bumps and bangs in the dimly lit darkness. On the nights I'm now about to speak about, everything started out as normal. I came in around sunset and got the nightly Passover and began my work. Around midnight I had to do my rounds around the property while getting the nightly pump numbers. I made my rounds with nothing but a flashlight around the main building. The oldest building is a good walking distance away from the main building. I sat out in the dark headed for that building, and I must also add that we aren't in the nicest area of town. However, I'm a big guy and I can hold my own. As I made my walk, I got an uneasy feeling. I had gotten them before, but I have a job to do and nothing came out of it. I rounded the corner and unlocked the door. As I did, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Again, I have a job to do, though. I opened the door and there stood nothing. I walked in and proceeded to get my numbers. I turned around and walked to the exit. As I turned to shut the door, I looked down the hallway to see a woman in pure white looking at me through the other door. I almost jumped out of my boots and pissed myself a little. I fell backwards. As I came back to reality, I once again made eye contact with this entity. As I met her gaze, everything in me said, "Hey, your life's in danger, buddy." Her face distorted and started to shift around. I was now frozen as she shifted into what looked like an Indian warrior. Her eyes were glowing. As I got to my feet, he had shifted into this huge wolf creature. The growls were chilling, to say the least, and it snarled, and then ran towards me. I had no time to even shut the door. I ran as fast as I could, screaming bloody murder. I felt it trying to bite my backside. It got a hold of my pants leg and tore it to shreds. I stumbled and rolled, but somehow managed to come up on my feet. I darted into the main building, and as I shut the door, I felt a hard thud on the other side. I locked the doors and cowered down inside. I could hear the thing casing the building, growling and scratching at the walls. I got the courage to look out the window, and just end up face to face with the white lady again. I had the police come and sit with me till the sun came up. No one else has seen the white lady since. It's still quite freaky, but I have a job to do.
The pumpkins sang. The flickering lampposts cast the streets of Terratum in a dark glow, but with the illumination of the bonfire within them, the residents could do without it. Vampires, princesses, and fairies flitted about, baskets swinging from their hands. Superheroes chatted idly with creepy clowns holding balloons, and skeletons warmed their bones by the satisfying heat. All were dancing to the song of the night, smoke curling up toward the full moon like greedy claws to a pearl. Pirates and demons worked in tandem to keep the fire roaring. Bats and black cats mingled on the side, while jack-o'-lanterns smiled on in barely contained excitement. Little werewolves eagerly galloped through the fields, squealing and devouring candies from their bursting sacks. In the hollow of Terratum, all was jubilant. The town celebrated in harmony. On the verge of the festivities, a young witch felt a tug on her cloak. She peered under the wide brim of her hat, turning her attention to a small ghost at her side.
Do you know where my mommy is?
It asked, in a small, scared voice. Immediately, the witch took pity on the poor thing. It was covered in white, draped all the way to the ground, with 2 tear-filled eyes that met hers. "I haven't, sweetheart," she cooed, her long black nails clenching her broomstick for balance as she stooped down to meet his gaze more evenly. "But I'd be happy to come look for her with you. What's your name, little one? Where did you last see your mummy?"
By the Jensen's house.
The ghost sniffled, shifting anxiously.
I'm Liam.
The witch paused. She didn't recognize any of those names. "Sorry, dear, I don't know them," she said, her voice calm and kind. "But come, let's search together." The specter nodded, and the witch straightened up. She didn't offer it her hand, as the little ghost seemingly had none. But then, suddenly, from underneath the veil of white, a long, skinny, pale arm emerged and stretched toward her. The witch screamed, and everything stopped. The music, now interrupted, screeched to a halt. Heads turned in all directions, trying to find the source of the commotion. The bats squeaked and flapped their wings, and the cat's fur bristled in agitation. The ghost began to cry, and the sheet slipped from his head, fluttering like a useless tissue, to the ground below. Almost in unison, Terratum gasped. The werewolf children howled in alarm. Zombie's jaws dropped to the floor. Jack-o'-lantern's chiseled grins shifted to little O's of surprise. All eyes, in varieties of size and number, were turned upon the sobbing child and the witch, who'd recoiled backward in shock. After a few seconds of utter silence, the witch finally composed herself. She dropped her broomstick to the ground and knelt beside the child, taking him into her arms. "Oh, I'm so sorry, darling. We just don't get many visitors like you here," she murmured, stroking his hair as he whimpered and shook. "Everything's perfectly all right. You're just turned around, that's all." She withdrew from his little body again, using her black cape to dry his blotchy red eyes. "Would you like to join our party until your mother comes to fetch you, Liam?" The child stared at the crowd, hesitating. The residents waited with bated breath. When he gave a little nod, the crowd cheered and released. The werewolf children, eager to introduce themselves to a new friend, rushed forward to show him their games. The witch smiled as she watched his sad eyes brighten, his sheet forgotten, as he was dragged into the fun. The party continued itself, and the bonfire burst back to life. The pumpkins resumed their song.
At 1:23 a.m. on the 26th of April, 1986, a routine safety test was being conducted in one of the Soviet Union's many nuclear power plants. A combination of design flaws and human error resulted in uncontrolled reaction conditions. superheated water was instantly turned into steam, causing an explosion and a subsequent open-air graphite fire. The Chernobyl disaster had begun. It took 36 Soviet officials to establish a 10-kilometer exclusion zone, which resulted in the rapid evacuation of almost 50,000 people from the nearest population center, Pripyat. Cleanup teams, giving the sickeningly euphemistic moniker of liquidators, worked tirelessly to rid the area of radioactive debris. Nearly 250,000 men worked shifts of only 90 seconds. Any longer and they would have been exposed to levels of radiation that would kill them in the most horrendous ways imaginable. Such levels of gamma radiation would cause cells to rot and decay from the inside out. Organs begin to liquefy internally. Blood vessels rupture and spill open, rendering attempts to administer morphine completely useless. The afflicted would die in agony, their attendants unable to provide even the most minimal of relief. The following month, after a futile attempt at controlling the catastrophe had already cost countless lives, a definitive solution was reached. The Soviets began work on designs for what they called the Objekt Ukryty, which literally translates to sheltering or covering in Russian, but what will be forever referred to as the sarcophagus. The sarcophagus was built to isolate almost 250 tons of devastatingly radioactive materials that would continue to endanger all forms of life for more than 250,000 years. At least, that's what the accepted truth of the matter is. The reality is much, much more terrifying. According to declassified documents obtained after the fall of the Soviet Union, the cleanup teams that initially worked on the decontamination process complained of encounters with anomalies during their work. These were initially dismissed as stress reactions after being exposed to abnormal amounts of radiation. But only when increased incidences of such anomalies were being reported, and even confirmed by senior military officials, were they taken seriously. What's more, encounters and sightings were beginning to be reported by civilians in the surrounding areas, who hysterically called what they saw Tinya, or shadows. Those who did not sign public statements declaring they had nothing more than overactive imaginations were sent to the gulags on charges of treasonous statements. Yet, while the Soviets imprisoned people for their lies, they also sent in what were called animal control teams. None of Pripyat's pet dogs or cats could have survived a month in the zone, receiving fatal doses of gamma radiation day after day, week after week. So, why were the animal control teams sent in? I know that the Chernobyl sarcophagus was constructed to contain something other than just the radiation. A month's worth of boric acid and sand drops did actually begin to see a reduction in the output of gamma rays, so many reports of what the documents only refer to as anomalies cannot simply be ignored. What I don't know is what exactly is being imprisoned inside that huge steel and concrete chamber known as a sarcophagus. But I do know, whatever it is, it terrified the Russians into silence. And when the American intelligence agencies found out what it was, they were complicit in the cover-up. As of April this year, the sarcophagus is undergoing testing of its installed systems. It was revealed that water is leaking through the sarcophagus via holes in the roof. Rain-induced corrosion of supporting beams now threatens the structure's integrity. The sarcophagus is falling apart. I don't know what's trapped in there, but I have a feeling that I'm going to find out. We're all going to find out very, very soon. And it'll be the end of us.